Chapter 699. In the dazzling hall, human figures were scattered about, each taking their own seats. On the main seat, Jian Ming, who was wearing a golden robe, was standing. At this moment, Jian Ming was slowly raising his pair of eyes that were filled with golden light. His emotionless gaze swept past everyone in the hall. Finally, it stopped on a white-robed young man. This person was the heir of the Zhuo clan, Zhuo Lin. Nephew Zhuo Lin, according to what you said, Xiao Yan disappeared in front of your eyes? Jian Ming's eyes slowly narrowed as he stared at Zhuo Lin, who was still standing with his head held high under his gaze. After a few breaths, he finally opened his mouth and asked in a low voice. The moment Jian Ming's words fell, the other people in the hall also turned their gazes over. Bai Ying was still fine, and his expression did not change much. On the other hand, the people from the other two clans turned their gazes towards Jian Ming in unison. Everyone's faces were exceptionally gloomy. Sect leader, you must not listen to this brat's nonsense. This matter must have been arranged by the Zhuo clan and the Bai clan together. Their goal is to suppress our two clans. Sect leader, you must not, did I ask you? However, just as a purple-robed old man from the two clans stood up and was about to speak, Jian Ming, who was sitting on the main seat, looked at the purple-robed old man with a dark and cold expression. The tone of his words was even more shocking. Following Jian Ming's reprimand, the purple-robed old man also sat back down heavily on his seat with a face full of unwillingness. His old face was filled with deep resentment. After a long while, he finally buried his head deeply. A pair of shriveled hands under his sleeves suddenly clenched tightly at this moment. On the seat beside him, a middle-aged man in a black robe had an extremely gloomy expression on his face. From time to time, his gaze would look at the people from the Bai clan and the Zhuo clan sitting opposite him. Killing intent surged in the depths of his eyes. This person was the current head of the Huo clan, Huo Xianrui. The purple-robed old man sitting beside him was the supreme elder of the Sun family, Sun Ji. The deaths of Huo Tianyi, Huo Ba, and Sun Shua could be said to have shaken the foundations of these two large clans. The two clans each had a 3-star Do Di and a 1-star late-stage Do Di. This kind of lineup could be said to be in existence that could do whatever they wanted in the entire western region. However, these three people, whose strength had already reached such an extent, had actually died miserably in the remains. Moreover, the ones who had returned alive from their journey with them were actually people from the other two large clans. This kind of result caused one to have difficulty not feeling suspicious in one's heart. Apart from Zhuo Lin and Bai Ying, there were no other witnesses. This meant that only the two of them knew what had happened in the ruins. They could say whatever they wanted to say to outsiders. As a result, the words of the two families were the least trustworthy. Jian Ming was naturally aware of this point in his heart. However, when he heard Xiao Yan's name from Zhuo Lin's mouth, some doubt involuntarily rose in his heart. If all of this was related to Xiao Yan, it was likely that he would really have to listen carefully. Jian Ming only slowly shifted his gaze away after seeing Sun Ji return to his seat. Immediately, his gaze paused on Huo Xianrui by the side. A cold glint that was difficult to detect flashed deep within his eyes. Soon after, he once again looked at Zhuo Lin. The expression in his eyes swiftly recovered to normal. However, his face still appeared dark and cold. Zhuo Lin, tell me everything that you saw that day. Jian Ming spoke faintly. At the same time, his body gently leaned back and leaned against the seat. His eyes were half narrowed as he stared at Zhuo Lin. Only when he heard that did Zhuo Lin raise his head. He seemed to have just heard Jian Ming's words and seemed to have been intimidated by the latter's aura. Zhuo Lin slowly stood up and swept his gaze across everyone present. The moment his gaze met Bai Ying's, the latter could clearly see a trace of coldness in Zhuo Lin's eyes. It seemed to be a threat, a request, or a neither servile nor overbearing feeling. So there are times when you're afraid, Bai Ying sneered inside when he saw this. Although Zhuo Lin wanted to kill him in the ruins that day, both of them were not in their best condition at that time. If they fought, it would not benefit either of them. It was even very likely that both of them would be left there forever. As a result, the two of them had no choice but to carefully and vigilantly leave the ruins in the end. Zhuo Lin, who had raised his head, recounted most of the things that had happened in the ruins that day. Of course, there were also some things that had been fabricated. Even if Jian Ming could hear them, he was too lazy to mention them. Regardless of whether he mentioned them or not, these things were no longer important. Death was death. Even if the reason was found, what was the use? If the relationship between the four great clans became intense, it would not be a good thing for his heavenly sword sect. It was better to avoid trouble. In any case, Jian Ming's aim was only Xiao Yan. Regardless of whether everyone present wanted to listen or not, they were all listening to Zhuo Lin's description. Due to the space within the large hall, waves of echoes continued to echo. Zhuo Lin was the only one speaking, but everyone seemed to have heard it a couple of times. Regardless of whether they wanted to listen or not, they more or less understood it. Hua Xianrui and Sun Ji frowned as they watched Zhuo Lin's speech. The two of them snorted disdainfully in their hearts. Their hearts did not believe that a mere bandit, even with the help of a puppet and a strange snake whose strength was merely that of a one-star Dodi, could be strong. They were actually able to turn the people from the four great clans into such a miserable state. This was complete nonsense. However, just because they did not believe it, it did not mean that everyone did not believe it. At the very least, Jian Ming had been attracted by Sun Shua's words at this moment. Jian Ming gradually listened carefully as she listened to the words that were emitted from Zhuo Lin's mouth. Her body, which was lying on the ground, had unknowingly sat up. Her narrowed eyes stared intently at Zhuo Lin. Finally, when Zhuo Lin spoke about how Xiao Yan's figure had suddenly disappeared from the open ground, some ripples involuntarily surfaced in Jian Ming's eyes. What everyone did not know was that a great storm had been stirred within Jian Ming's heart at this moment. According to what Zhuo Lin had said, after Xiao Yan had used all his strength to unleash his douqi in the remains back then, his condition could already be considered as an arrow at the end of its flight. It was impossible for him to have the ability to retaliate, much less survive that kind of energy storm. However, the result that Zhuo Lin had given was that Xiao Yan had disappeared from the open ground together with the narwhal snake. This was something that was impossible, but it had really happened. Xiao Yan, who had lost all his fighting strength, would definitely not be able to rely on his own strength to escape from that place, much less bring the narwhal snake with him. Since that was the case, the only explanation was that there was someone else secretly helping them and helping them escape from the remains. That person's skills were so great that even with Zhuo Lin's and Bai Ying's strength, they were unable to sense any unusual movements. This also meant that the latter's strength was far above theirs. A mysterious strong person had suddenly intervened and rescued Xiao Yan when he was in danger. This kind of thing might appear illogical in the eyes of others, and it was also not true. However, in Jian Ming's eyes, it was a different kind of view. Don't tell me, behind Xiao Yan, is there really another strong person protecting him? Jian Ming's eyes were empty and lifeless as she sat on the main seat. Her brows were tightly knit together. Her heart involuntarily recalled the big battle in Green Jade City a few years ago. For elite Do Di had gathered in one city. Their aim was actually a mere bandit, who was like an ant in their eyes. Originally, they had thought that it would be an easy parade. However, they did not expect that the four of them, who were elite Do Di, would end up fleeing like stray dogs. Jian Ming would never forget the humiliation that day. He was even more unable to forget the great strength of that aura. If that mysterious person had really attacked, Jian Ming dared to guarantee that even if the four of them were to join forces, they would definitely not be able to last one exchange with that mysterious strong person. However, the scene back then had appeared once again. Another mysterious strong person had suddenly intervened when Xiao Yan was in danger. If this news were to spread to the ears of the other three sect leaders, it was likely that it would stir an invisible storm. Zhuo Lin, who had finished narrating all of this, returned to calmness. He no longer spoke. His eyes were indifferent as they swept over the people from the two clans. He glanced at Bai Ying before returning to his seat. Everyone present threw their gazes toward Jianming on the main seat. After what had happened earlier, everyone present consciously shut their mouths this time around without Jianming speaking. In an instant, the atmosphere within the hall had once again become strange. It did not appear nervous, but it also caused everyone to not dare to relax even a little. Everyone hoped to be called out by Jianming, but at the same time, they were afraid that they would open their mouths and say the wrong thing. Can you guarantee that what you have said is true? The atmosphere in the hall was in a deadlock for a long time. A moment later, Jianming once again opened his mouth to speak. This junior dares to guarantee with my life that what I have said earlier is true. Shuo Lin stood up. His eyes looked at Jianming on the main seat. His eyes were calm as he spoke without looking sideways. Jianming could not help but feel surprised in his heart when he saw Shuo Lin's manner. He immediately nodded gently. All right, I hope that I can believe your words. Shuo Lin sat down again. At the same time, Jianming turned his gaze to Bai Ying and said in a serious voice, Patriarch Bai, only you and nephew Shuo Lin came out of the ruins that day. Can you guarantee that what Shuo Lin said earlier is true? At the end of his words, Jianming's gaze was somewhat cold as he stared at Bai Ying. If Bai Ying criticized Shuo Lin's words in the slightest, then the latter would have to pay the price for what he had said earlier. After all, he was willing to use his life as a guarantee. At this moment, the people from the other three clans instantly looked at Bai Ying. Jianming's action could be said to have placed Shuo Lin's life in Bai Ying's hands. Whether he lived or died depended on Bai Ying's words. Hua Xianrui and Sun Ji stared at Bai Ying with sneers on their faces. They naturally wanted Bai Ying to say what they wanted to hear. They were certain that Bai Ying would definitely say those words. As long as Bai Ying spoke, not only would it be considered as revenge for their two clans, but it would also remove a huge problem for their three clans. The two clans were naturally happy to do such a thing. Compared to the reactions of the people from the two clans, the expressions of the people from the Zhuo clan changed. They did not expect Jianming to use such a method. In this way, Shuo Lin's life was in the hands of Bai Ying. Beside Shuo Lin, a middle-aged man next to him was about to stand up, but he was pulled down by Shuo Lin, who had a calm expression on his face. Shuo Lin shook his head without a trace. When the latter saw this, although he was still very worried in his heart, in the end, his body swayed and sat down heavily. At the same time, Bai Ying, who was being stared at by everyone, also felt a sense of difficulty in his heart. If he said what the two clans and even Jianming wanted to hear, then Shuo Lin's life would be in danger and the Zhuo clan's momentum would be greatly reduced. At that time, even their entire clan would be affected. This situation was definitely what the three clans wanted to see. But if Shuo Lin died, then Bai Ying would not only have to face the enmity of the other two families, but he would also be targeted by the Zhuo family. Coupled with the greedy wolf that was the Heavenly Sword sect, the Bai family's situation would definitely fall to rock bottom. Besieged on all sides, the Bai clan's future would be in danger. However, if Bai Ying disobeyed Jianming's orders, then the Bai clan would inevitably be suppressed by the Sky Sword sect. In this way, his clan would also become the target of public criticism. His days would not be easy. However, even so, compared to being swallowed up like the former, it was better to temporarily restrain himself and wait for an opportunity to act in the future. This was not a bad idea. Jianming. I didn't expect you to finally make a move against our four great clans. If you want to swallow us, you won't be able to bite our hard bones without breaking a few of your dog teeth. Bai Ying cursed in his heart. A moment later, he finally slowly raised his head. Under the gazes of everyone present, he looked at Jianming, who was seated at the head of the table. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a warm smile that was like a spring breeze. Hua Xianrui and Sun Ji stared at Bai Ying, hoping that Bai Ying would say what they wanted to hear. When Jianming saw the smile on Bai Ying's face, he couldn't help but have a bad premonition. Under his wide sleeves, a pair of withered hands slowly raised and involuntarily gripped the armrest of the chair tightly. Reporting to Sect Master, what Shuo Lin said just now was witnessed by this subordinate with his own eyes. Every word is true. Hua. As soon as Bai Ying finished speaking, everyone in the hall was in an uproar. They never thought that Bai Ying would actually say such words. Everyone's faces were filled with disbelief. At the same time, on the main seat, the stone armrest that Jian Ming was holding tightly in his hand had inadvertently turned into a pile of powder. Genius remembered this address in a second. Mobile version of reading website, M. Chapter 700. While everyone in the Sky Sword sect was talking about Xiao Yan, the other three sects in Green Hunchback Mountain were also discussing what happened in the desolate ancient ruins a few months ago. Refining God's sect. In a majestic hall filled with golden light, the sect leader of the Refining God sect, Qin Zhen, was sitting on the main seat. Below him were the various leaders of the Refining God sect. In the Refining God sect, other than the sect leader Qin Zhen, the elders and deacons sitting below the stage had the greatest authority. Naturally, they were involved in any major matter in the sect. Elder Zhao, what do you think about the desolate ancient ruins? Qin Zhen sat upright on the main seat as his gaze swept across the elders in the hall. Finally, his gaze landed on a silver-robed elder who was sitting closest to him. The elder was dressed in a purple robe. His body was upright with his eyes slightly closed. His aura was completely concealed within his body, making it difficult for others to detect him. At a glance, this elder gave off a rather imposing and domineering feeling, causing others to not dare to look at him. When the elder heard Qin Zhen's words, his slightly closed eyes slowly opened. Soon after, he stood up leisurely. The brows on his old face slightly furrowed, as if he was thinking about how to speak. After a short stubble, the silver-robed elder raised his gaze and looked at Qin Zhen, who was sitting on the main seat. He respectfully cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader, this Xiao Yan is unpredictable. We know too little about him and it is difficult for this old man to comment on him. Furthermore, in the desolate ancient ruins, other than those who did not enter the core area of the ruins, only the Zhuo family's eldest son, Zhuo Lin, and the Bai family's head, Bai Ying, have returned alive. Therefore, regarding what happened in there, only the two families under the Sky Sword sect know. Judging from our point of view is really unwise." When they heard this, the other elders in the hall could not help but frown. The elders' words directly contradicted Qin Zhen's words. As the sect leader, Qin Zhen's words were something that no one in the sect could refute. However, the words of this purple-robed elder were likely going to attract trouble. However, just when everyone thought that Qin Zhen would be angry because of this, the latter smiled and nodded in agreement under the surprised gazes of everyone present. "That's right. First elder's thoughts are my thoughts." When Qin Zhen's words were spoken, the many elite Dou Di in the hall involuntarily raised their brows. They immediately faced each other and a wave of private conversations were immediately emitted from the hall. Numerous gazes involuntarily revealed surprise when they looked at this first elder. At the same time, they were curious and doubtful. Almost everyone in the western region knew that Qin Zhen's character was proud and aloof. He never placed anyone in his eyes. However, he seemed to have restrained himself a lot in the face of this new first elder. At the very least, he would not be as fierce and overbearing as he was in the past. That's right. This purple-robed elder was the first elder that the Divine Refining sect had just appointed a couple of months ago. His appointment and even his appearance caused everyone in the Divine Refining sect to be surprised. This was because no one in the sect had seen this purple-robed elder before he became the first elder of the Divine Refining sect. His sudden appointment had stirred up a great commotion within the Divine Refining sect. However, this commotion was swiftly suppressed under the personal appearance of the original first elder. Although everyone had some dissatisfaction in their hearts, after a couple of months of gradually getting used to it, everyone had reluctantly accepted this first elder. However, what they didn't expect was that not only was the original great elder extremely modest towards this purple-robed old man, even the sect leader of their own sect was actually so amiable towards her. This truly caused them to be extremely puzzled in their hearts. Just who was this newly promoted great elder? What was his identity? Naturally, no one would tell them the answer to this question. Looking at the whispering crowd below the stage, Chen Zhen, who was seated on the leader's seat, sneered in his heart. The reason why he had raised this question was to let those dissatisfied fellows below the stage understand exactly what kind of position this first elder held in their divine refining sect. If those present were still full of complaints about this new first elder 2 hours ago, now that Chen Zhen had expressed his stance, these people would probably be too late to curry favor with the purple-robed elder. Humph, Chen Zhen laughed mockingly in his heart. After which, he and the purple-robed old man echoed each other and said a bunch of nonsense. After that, they casually dismissed everyone present. Only then did the meeting in the large hall come to an end. Looking at the final hall door that was heavily shut, Chen Zhen slowly stood up from his seat. With his hands behind his back, he walked down the stage and arrived beside the purple-robed elder. "Ha, junior brother, from now on, you are the only first elder of the divine refining sect." "Ha, I still have to thank senior brother. This bunch of trash, if not for senior brother saying that there was still a use for them, junior brother would have already taken action against them." Hearing Chen Zhen's words, the purple-robed elder stood up and respectfully cupped his hands towards Chen Zhen. His tone was cold as he laughed. Humph, although these fellows have formed their own cliques, as long as they remain in the divine refining sect, they will always be our lackeys. Now is not the time to do so. Chen Zhen narrowed his eyes as his lips curled into a sinister smile. Naturally, he knew what those people were thinking. However, for the future of the divine refining sect, he had to endure it no matter what. When the time was right, those people would become useless pawns in his hands and be mercilessly crushed by him. After the two of them chatted for a while, their bodies distorted slightly and turned into illusionary figures. Finally, they completely disappeared from the hall. On the other side, within the battle martial sect, Wu Jitian had also dismissed everyone in the hall. Arriving in front of the hall door, Wu Jitian raised his head and looked at the sky. His fierce-looking face revealed a solemn expression. Looks like the current western region is no longer as peaceful as before. At the very least, it was calm on the surface in the past. It was fine if there was an undercurrent flowing in the interior. Now, a real storm is about to arrive. The sky of the western region is about to change. His mouth softly muttered. Immediately, Wu Jitian's eyes slowly fell. Finally, he looked towards the south. That was where the Shilin mountain range was located. At the same time, it was also where the desolate ancient remains had appeared. Over 10 elite Do-Di had died at that place because of one person, a young man wearing a black robe. It was likely that no one in the entire western region would be able to do such a thing, however, the impossible that everyone felt in their hearts had now become reality. The location of the Withered Leaf sect. The somewhat dark large hall appeared incomparably quiet. There was not a single light within the empty large hall. The withered yellow pillars were like rotten wood. They appeared to be standing in the large hall with great difficulty. Even the air was filled with the smell of something rotting. It was extremely pungent. The deepest part of the large hall was dim without any light. At a glance, it was dark. If one were to walk in this place, it was likely that even an elite Do-Di would involuntarily feel a shudder in his heart. Such a sinister place was actually the face of a sect. This was really difficult to imagine. This kind of place appeared to have been abandoned for many years. Perhaps no one had maintained it since it was built, resulting in it falling into such a state. It really caused one to feel sad. Could such a place really be the meeting hall of a sect? It was likely that no one would believe it. In this dark, desolate, sorrowful and terrifying place, there was finally a small space that was surrounded by light at the deepest part of the large hall. The faint cream-white light emitted a gentle glow in the air. It was able to illuminate this small space without causing one to feel that it was glaring. Within this space, an old man wearing a linen robe with a shady face was seated cross-legged. At this moment, between the old man's eyebrows, a milky white fluorescent light the size of a rice grain was gradually surging out from a huge ball of light in front of him. Following the old man's thoughts, it gradually converged into the soul bead in his mind and became a part of his strength. A long while later, the old man, whose eyes were tightly shut, finally slowly opened them. A cold expression flashed across the deep part of his eyes where a dark green glow lingered. Immediately, he swiftly stored the milk-white light cluster in front of him into his storage ring. Only then did he open his mouth and speak in an indifferent tone. "Since you have already come, why do you need to watch by the side? Come out and meet me." "Tsk tsk tsk tsk, sect leader, why do you need to hide? Don't tell me that I have not seen many small things like you." A cluster of dense black fog swiftly flashed in front of the old man in a ghost-like manner as the strange laughter slowly sounded within the large hall. In an instant, one could see a strange-looking ink-colored mask within the exposed black fog. The appearance of the mask appeared to be some kind of magical beast. Its expression appeared quite ferocious and terrifying. This mask was just like the mask that Xiao Yan had obtained from the third hall chief of the ghost hall back then. Needless to say, this cluster of black fog was naturally a member of the ghost hall. This old man who was addressed as sect leader was the sect leader of the Withered Leaf sect, Yi Luotian. As the saying goes, one does not visit a temple without a reason. I'm afraid that you have not come to find me at such a time just to say such nonsense to me. Yi Luotian's gaze swept back and forth across the dark space in front of him. Although the large hall was completely dark, everything seemed to be clearly visible in front of his eyes. This dark world was unable to block the eyesight of an elite Do-di. "Tsk tsk tsk tsk, do you really not know what I am here for? Xiao Yan." A strange laughter was emitted from the darkness. Soon after, Yi Luotian spoke in an indifferent tone. "Sect leader is indeed as I wish. Tsk tsk tsk